Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
What's up, everybody? I am Dan Wiederer, joined by old friend Rich Campbell, former writer from the Chicago Tribune, now has moved on to bigger and better things. But I've lured him back in to have a very familiar discussion about a very familiar struggling football team and their very familiar problem on trying to get the quarterback position correct. Rich, how we doing?
It's been so long since I've seen you in person. You've gotten so big. You're just so big.
I mean,
you're doing math now, reading, I bet.
I'm a YouTube star now.
Good. Well, I'm glad to try to get some of that sprinkled magic dust here.
This is, as I mentioned, a familiar conversation. We've had a lot of talks about this over the years as colleagues. You obviously were on the beat with me for 7 seasons, and we covered the drafting of Mitch Trubisky. We covered the rise of Mitch Trubisky. We covered the decline of Mitch Trubisky. We covered the, bungled processes in the draft process of drafting Mitch Trubisky. The reason this topic is relevant this week, as you know, is Deshaun Watson is coming to Soldier Field to play the Chicago Bears. His first game in Soldier Field. I think a lot of people in Chicago think that is about 4 seasons too late for him to be playing for the first time in Chicago. But I just wanted to start at the start, and I guess now that you're a little bit more removed from it, get your impressions of just how wayward this franchise continues to be and how it continues to be the same storyline over and over.
Yeah, the predominant emotion that I feel is sadness. I mean, relatively speaking, right? I mean, we're talking about football sadness, but that this team continues to struggle. They're stuck in mediocrity. They continue to get things wrong. It causes a lot of people pain, real pain. And it's sad to see. It's sad to see the potential of more turnover at Hallis Hall, with people potentially losing their jobs, good people that I worked with for a few years and that you continue to, and people that are good men, right? That go through this, and you just tie together these threads that haven't changed in 25 years in that building. And so to see what has happened to them this season, particularly at the quarterback position, and how that has been the anchor that drags them down, no one can say they're surprised, right? I mean, the way Mitch's trajectory has gone, but it is nonetheless jarring to see it reach this point. And I was looking at the Bears' schedule the other day and talking to a coworker about just how all of these elements are coming together again at the wrong time. The Bears on a 6-game losing streak. Oh, here comes Deshaun Watson. Oh, let's dust off that narrative. Right. And I just really appreciate the piece you wrote for ChicagoTribune.com this week, looking back at the selection process, because, and you alluded to this in the story. Some people might say, hey, get over it. You got to move on. But you've got to understand the history to ensure it doesn't happen again. And it's super relevant right now because the Bears are at a point where they are going to have to decide who's going to pick the next quarterback and how they're going to do it. And with Deshaun coming to Soldier Field, like you said, first time, now's the time to examine that.
Yeah, I said on the radio, Rich, this week that this is not a get over it storyline, because this is a historic miss. This isn't just a 2-year thing or a 3-year thing. This is a historic miss. When you see Patrick Mahomes on his way to Canton in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, when you see Deshaun Watson signing a 4-year, $156 million extension and putting roots down in Houston, and then you see Mitch Trubisky being benched and then coming back from his benching and having a couple rough outings to some extent and headed to the final 4 games of his tenure in Chicago, it's very jarring to see the contrast. When we talk about the Watson piece, obviously you and I in 2019 collaborated on a very extensive piece on the entirety of the Bears pre-draft process in identifying Mitch Trubisky as their guy, not identifying Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes as the guys that they wanted as their number 1 pick at that position. Remember, they had their first pick from the quarterback buffet in 2017. It leads us back to so many familiar questions on, was it just the wrong pick or were there flaws in the process, right? And so that's some of what you and I uncovered a year ago, what I've kind of revisited with some updated sentiments from around the league. I had a league executive tell me a couple of weeks ago, boy, this is the story that just won't go away there in Chicago, isn't it? And I said, yeah, and that's what it is when you continue to miss the playoffs, you continue to not be able to get your quarterback position right. But let's start on March 16th, 2017 in that Clemson Pro Day, because I attended that, and you obviously, as my close colleague, were on the other end of a cell phone, right? And I remember calling you that morning and being like, the whole contingent is here, right? John Fox, Ryan Pace, Josh Lucas, Dowell Loggins, Dave Ragone. The Bears brought a cavalcade, 5 people, to Clemson's Pro Day, which was attended by all 32 teams. There were more than 100 NFL personnel at that Pro Day to go evaluate and see Deshaun Watson. But in retrospect, Rich, the reason that day is so significant to me is because it illuminates so much about what that Bears process was about. And they were there only for show that day, right? And so step one of that Pro Day, let's be clear. Evaluations of quarterbacks are done well before a pro day arrives, right? There's a comprehensive evaluation done during the season, and the Bears obviously had a full file of information on Watson, but they also made a calculated choice to go to Clemson's pro day with a big group to be seen, to be noticed, to run a play fake on the rest of the league to say, hey, we are very interested in Deshaun Watson. And so step one of this pro day is the secrecy and the deception involved in the process seem to be more prioritized than other more important elements of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember you calling me from the pro day as it was getting started and saying, you won't believe what happened when I pulled into the parking lot, and at the exact moment you got out of your car, who pulled in what, the white SUV? Is that it?
Huge SUV. I don't remember the color, but I do remember all 5 of those men got out, and Dowell Loggins looked at me and said, boy, you're a long way from home. And I said, so are you. Why are we both here?
So go back even a week or two, covering that quarterback search, and we knew they were going to take a quarterback at some point because they were positioned too well, and Jay Cutler, his time had run out, and so we wanted the quarterback search covered from all angles. And you said you were going to go to Clemson. I was going to go to North Carolina, remember? And we decided there's no way they're taking that guy. There's no way. We're canceled the trip. There's no way they're taking that guy, right? I mean, that's how we ended up. And so, yeah, in hindsight, you can look at that visit to Clemson. You understand that it was not thorough, that the due diligence was not done. They did not take Deshaun Watson out to the dinner. They did not put him through the private workout, which not only would you find a majority of NFL executives that say, if you're going to draft a quarterback, if you're intent on drafting a quarterback, which the Bears were, you've got to do your due diligence with every potential candidate. Okay. Yeah. So whether Ryan Pace agrees with that or not, we're left to believe that Deshaun Watson was never a serious candidate to be picked by the Bears. And so, yeah, they go on that night to dine with Trubisky, and in hindsight, it leads you to believe that their mind was made up. Their mind was made up by then. It's the only thing you can conclude. And you and I revisited in the piece we wrote in 2019 all of the reasons to question Deshaun Watson's ability to succeed in the NFL, particularly his accuracy and the interceptions he threw. But they just didn't do the
interceptions in college, as well as, you heard from a lot of folks, look at his build, right? He's a slender build. He's dealt with injury problems in college. We don't know about his durability. Of course, there were questions. There's questions with every quarterback prospect. But to your point, you gotta make sure you do the entirety of the process with the guy and give him his chance, right? Give him his chance to wow you, whether it's in a private workout, whether it's over dinner, whether it's him explaining to you what drives him, what allows him to have such competitive excellence at the biggest moments on the biggest stages, right? You have to be able to have those conversations and feel that. And that's what, so I've told people along the way that I was very high on Watson, as you know very well, going into that draft. And it wasn't just this blind, like, hey, I watched the national championship game on TV and decided that's the guy the Bears should take. When you talk to people throughout the pre-draft process, all the messages were consistent about you'll never regret it. And in every moment of his life, from childhood to high school to college, he finds a way with the competitive excellence inside him to bring out his best when it matters most. And what else do you want in a quarterback than that quality, correct?
A winner. I mean, he just won, right? He lifted everyone around him. And as you look at that process of the Bears, it's so ironic. If their intention was to deceive the rest of the league, why not go through with the dinner and the private workout and all that to layer on the steps of how convincing this could have been?
Right.
And they didn't.
Right.
And so the only thing that I think we're left to conclude is that they were out on him. They were just out on him from the beginning. And to me,
And we never found out why.
Yes. And to me, what I would piece together, what I would infer is that it says a lot more about how much Ryan Pace loved Trubisky rather than how much he didn't like Watson.
So there are three things from that pro day that give it significance in my mind. Number one is the secrecy that we talked about, that it was really their presence was just a play action fake. The second one is what you just mentioned, the passion with which they coveted Mitch Trubisky as their franchise quarterback, right? That became very apparent after the drafting of Mitch and everything we learned about how much Ryan was drawn to his accuracy from college, which didn't translate to the pro, from his decision-making, from his ability to process the field, which didn't translate to the NFL, and all these things that led him to believe that he was going to be the second coming of Drew Brees, who he obviously was very familiar with in New Orleans. They didn't pan out. So they were obviously in an early stage in love with Mitch Trubisky to the point where it blinded them to doing the rest of their homework on a guy like Watson. Now, to their credit, they did do their homework on Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes was the number 2 quarterback on their board. They went to Texas Tech and visited with him, took him out to dinner, put him through a private workout, and ended up putting him in their top cloud of draft prospects that year, which was not an easy cloud to crack, with Myles Garrett and Solomon Thomas and Jamal Adams and Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette. Patrick Mahomes was right up there, right? But again, so you've got the secrecy, you have the sort of infatuation with Mitch Trubisky, and then you have, Rich, what I consider one of the fatal flaws of this is it's the disconnect with the coaching staff.
So yeah, I'm glad you're mentioning that right now, because think about that group that they took there. 3 of those guys, John Fox, Dow Loggins, Dave Ragone, thought that they were there earnestly, genuinely, yes, to evaluate Deshaun because they were going to pick him. Not even they understood where Pace's head was at the time.
Sure. And look, the thing to remember, what I was trying to wrap my brain around was, how did they not get to the end of that trip and go, how come we didn't do the same things with Deshaun that we did with Patrick and Mitch? And what I've pieced together is there was this sort of sentiment of, there's still 6 weeks before the draft. Right. We've still got time to bring Deshaun to Hallis Hall, put him on the whiteboard, have that top 30 private visit with him on our campus and learn more about him. And so there wasn't this idea that when they left Clemson, they were just closing the book on that. And remember, as you mentioned, they left Clemson in a hurry because they had a flight to catch to Raleigh-Durham so they could get to Chapel Hill that night for a dinner with Mitch Trubisky in a reservation at Bin 54, which he made under the name James McMahon. All these things come to the process. But to your point, there was just not this connection between the coaching staff and the front office that allows you to have potentially contentious discussions assessing the quarterbacks, potentially productive discussions, sifting through their strengths and weaknesses. And all of a sudden it leads you to draft day where the coaching staff is genuinely surprised when the Bears make the bold trade up from number 3 to number 2 to take Mitch Trubisky. And oh, by the way, you used all that secrecy, and then still, when the clock started ticking on draft night, you still had to use draft capital to make sure you got the guy that you were trying to conceal interest in for 6 months.
Yeah, there are so many problems that stem from that disconnect. And one of them is the inability to create a developmental plan for the quarterback, which is going to be so important. Let's say in Trubisky's case, having played as little as he did collegiately, only 13 starts at North Carolina, that you're going to have to tailor an offense to his skills in some ways. You're going to have to figure out, in the circumstances that were in place, how he's going to get reps behind Mike Glennon and figure out how to bring him along, and what's the timeline and what are some of the things we need to work on his game. Without that type of connectivity with the coaching staff, it doesn't exist. And as it turns out, Ryan Pace never intended for John Fox or Dow Loggins to develop Mitch Trubisky. I mean, the moment that pick was made, it was clear. The fate was sealed. So I want to talk about that in a second. But then, the other part of it is not only were they disconnected, but Pace, and this is what is so disappointing to me, is that he portrayed it as a lie. Remember that they sat down at that Saturday evening press conference, the one of draft weekend, when the draft is over and finally the head coach takes part. The first 2 nights you hear from the GM, and then on the final day, the head coach takes part. And Ryan Pace and John Fox sat shoulder to shoulder. There might as well have been the Grand Canyon between them. In 11 years covering the NFL, this ranks as one of the most surreal moments that I had experienced. I mean, John Fox looked like an absolute ghost. I mean, he was sitting there trying to justify a pick that he didn't want to make, that he had no input in. And remember, he wanted Deshaun Watson.
Correct.
So
I think he might have, if he was given his choice, he may have drafted Jamal Adams. But as far as quarterbacks go, he really liked Watson the most.
That's right. And so I remember walking from the media room at Hallis Hall, just through those sliding doors back to our seats, and thinking, he's fired. It's over. I mean, he was asked, John, how does taking Mitch, after 2 losing seasons like you've had, how does taking a quarterback who the organization intends to keep on the bench, how does that make you better? And he came up with some answer about how we're healthier this year or something. I mean, it was just, he had nothing. He had nothing, and he didn't even try to fake it. You'll recall, Dan, that earlier that day, Chris Mortensen of ESPN reported that John Fox had not been clued in on that. And Pace got up and denied it. It turns out, I mean, that was totally true. And it's so disappointing from Ryan, who has talked for so long. I mean, really built his image and his program around no ego, transparency, collaboration, all of those
honest communication.
Yes, all of those pillars he undermined. Now, I love the quote you had in your story this week about, if you go against all of those grains that you've set up for yourself, and you go with that secrecy, and you go against your head coach, and you're disconnected, but you get it right.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers that, and they're building a statue for it. And so again, for me, that is just a further indication that Pace was absolutely in love with Mitch. He was so assured that Mitch was going to be the guy. And so that's why I get back to, when you go to pick the next quarterback in 2021, which they need to, or maybe in 2022, if they want to wait and spin their wheels for a while, how do you trust a guy who was so wrong? He was so wrong.
And I guess this leads to another question that was sort of central to some of my newer reporting on this topic is in healthy organizations, how would this have gone differently? And so what you hear from people around the league, people that were familiar with this process, they talk about a system of checks and balances. They talk about oversight, and that a general manager who at the time was entering his 3rd year, a very young general manager, inexperienced general manager without any accomplishments career-wise to that point whatsoever on his resume, how do you provide him with the direction? How do you provide him with the supporting resources that help steer what we can identify as one of the most significant decisions in the history of the franchise, which is now in year 101, right? There's no question that this registers as one of the most significant decisions in this franchise's history. And yet there wasn't that oversight. There wasn't that channel of communication, apparently, with the people above Ryan, whether that's George McCaskey, whether that's team president Ted Phillips, to say, hey, give us a heads up if you plan on drafting our franchise quarterback, and perhaps we can, ask you some extra questions. Perhaps we can give you some boxes that you might want to check before you get to the end of this. And so there are those questions that still linger around the league, that there is a difference between being a micromanager as an owner or a team president and asking productive questions that provide leadership, right? That provide guidance. You and I have both worked for a lot of different editors at a lot of different publications over our career. You know when you're working with someone above you that makes you better, and when you're left to your own devices and just allowed to do whatever the heck you want to do. We've both experienced it. I know it. We've experienced it alongside each other at stretches of our career. And so, those pieces of the puzzle certainly weren't in place. And when you talk about going to pick the next guy, boy, George McCaskey got his hands full trying to put together a more solid infrastructure that helps whoever it is picking that quarterback succeed in that grand mission.
Yeah, that's everything. What you said right there is the absolute essence of the crossroads the Bears find themselves at this point. I think you asked the question, how would a functional, healthy organization have handled it? I think on the morning of the draft, the owner has a strong sense, if you're picking that high, the owner has a strong sense of the player, the quarterback that you want. And the owner would also be able to tell you with 100% certainty that there is a full agreement between the head coach and the general manager about that. And in this case, there is no way George McCaskey could have said that about the situation, because it wasn't true. And so George let down the organization by not having that check and balance in place. And Ryan, who has really impressed George over the years with his ability to communicate, his thoroughness, the way he relates to other people. I'm not sure he had the credentials to operate with that type of autonomy, to be disconnected from the head coach in that way. I asked myself last season, as Mitch was kind of falling apart, let me just say this. If Ryan had gotten to the end of 2016 and he's in love with Mitch and he just had gone to George and say, you know what, George, if I'm empowered here, I want this quarterback, but John's not the one to lead us. We have to make a change. We have to make a coaching change. And if he had fired John after that second season, I think that this could have been salvaged in a different way, but it wasn't.
That's exactly where I was going to go, because I was going to say, to be clear, I don't think either one of us at that stage in the spring of 2017 was saying, entrust your franchise quarterback to John Fox, right? Like, he's a defensive-minded guy who took great pride in winning games when they didn't have to throw the ball 10 times, right? Like, this wasn't the guy that was this offensive visionary that was going to take your quarterback. But then this leads back to this point that you are basically drafting a quarterback for a coaching staff that's not there yet and is a year away from arriving. And so now all of a sudden you are wasting a year of Mitch Trubisky's development to some extent. And look, we got in the middle of 2018 and there were people still talking about you can't even evaluate Mitch Trubisky on his rookie season because he didn't have the coaches in place. And you and I kind of rolled our eyes. You can evaluate him as long as he's playing NFL football, right? But the point being that the Bears did not have a springboard set up for Mitch Trubisky. They had a hold tight, we'll get you taken care of in 2018 setup for him. And that obviously doesn't help the development of your franchise quarterback. It's just basically asking him to get his feet wet, and then we'll try to find you somebody in year 2 that can take you to the next level. And by the way, Matt Nagy hasn't been the answer to that question either. There's so many layers to this, Rich. And again, it is the story that won't go away. And I had an executive tell me, look, if you look at Ryan Pace's comprehensive track record, there are a lot of hits, there are a lot of misses, like any general manager. He could have been a general manager for the Chicago Bears for 15, 20 years if he did every other thing exactly the same as he's done it, but also picked Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes, right? One decision is sort of that fork in the road that takes you one direction versus another. And that's life in the NFL, right? Particularly with that position.
That's life in the NFL. That's life in the NFL. So how do you not make sure all of these guardrails are in place that we're talking about? The connectivity with the coaching staff, the plan for developing the young quarterback, and this vision overall. I mean, so much of this was either disjointed, it was disconnected, or the sequencing was out of place. And so this incubator, right, that the Bears thought they were building here, this incubator's sitting on the shelf and the plug is hanging in your hand. It's not in the wall. And where does it leave them? I mean, back when you make this pick, right, any team that makes the first round quarterback pick in the top 15, let's say, what do we always say? This is a pick that if you get it wrong, it'll set your franchise back at least 5 years. Here we are. It's setting them back 5 years. They've got a defense that's suddenly gotten a bit older, right? I mean, quality in the way they play still. Their stats measure up very well to the rest of the league, but it's very clear, at least over the past couple of weeks, they cannot carry this team, right? I mean, and they're not getting younger. They need talent offensively. So it's not like you can just go draft the savior quarterback in 2021 and plug him into what you had built. What you had built is evolving and it's not getting better defensively right now. So then who picks the next QB? I mean, you start with, can it be Ryan? And I would love to hear the argument in favor of keeping him in place to pick it, because I just don't think the proof is there, the evidence is there to give you that type of confidence.
Right. And those are the questions George McCaskey is going to have to answer as they get to the end of the season, January 3rd being the final Sunday of week 17. And that's when a lot of these decisions will come to the forefront, and they're going to have to make some very difficult and very challenging decisions. There are a couple other things that I want to talk about before we wrap up. Number one, Watson's arrival to Chicago is interesting to me because the city of Chicago is much more compelled by this storyline than Deshaun Watson is. Like, it was out of his mind on draft night when the Texans traded up 13 slots, took him at number 12, and he had a new home and has obviously had great success. And they just gave him $156 million in their money this, in September to keep him there for a longer term. And so this isn't one of these vendetta-filled games for Watson where it's like, man, I just want to stick it to the Chicago Bears. He just kind of shrugs it off, still sort of curious about why the Bears didn't show him more attention. But those who know him well enough know that, that he remembers, and it'll at least be in the back of his mind as he comes in here. I guess I'll see what you think about that, because you sat in Soldier Field a December ago when Patrick Mahomes came in and counted to 10.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say Deshaun might say that, and I know you talked to Quincy Avery, his confidant and one of his quarterback tutors, and he said that as well. Get back to me after Deshaun scores one late and counts to 12 on his hands, right? Like Patrick Mahomes did in December a year ago. This is meaningful for a couple of reasons. One, because both teams are struggling. They have bad records, and so at this time of year, in a season like this that has been so disrupted and so painstaking in a number of unusual ways, you find the motivation that gets you through a week. And for Deshaun Watson in a non-conference game when the playoffs are out of reach for them and they're looking at a coaching search, this might be something that lights his fire for 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon, especially if it's cold and it's not the most fun conditions to play in. The other part of it is, as we mentioned before, just exactly where the Bears are in their season. Let's say if the record was reversed and the Bears had won 6 in a row, this would be just a different type of storyline with Watson possibly derailing the Bears' push to the playoffs. But now it's kind of grim, right? I mean, it's like a kick them while they're down type of feel, and it's just if you're Ryan Pace and the schedule came out when it did in earlier this year, and you were to draw up a worst case scenario, I think this would be it. L6 entering Deshaun Watson coming to town. What could be worse?
L6 coming off primetime loss to the Vikings, worst primetime humiliating loss to the Packers, awful blown 10-point lead in the final 5 minutes against the last place and dysfunctional Detroit Lions. Quarterback you didn't draft coming to town to add another layer of misery to your wretched season. It is not the greatest setup for the Chicago Bears. Certainly it makes for good theatrics. I'm eager to see Deshaun Watson play in person. To that note, Rich, I'll say this because I've never been able to get a direct answer on whether the Bears had anyone at Deshaun Watson's national championship game performance against Alabama. I know they evaluated him at some point during that junior season. They had in-person eyes on him from Ryan Pace and Josh Lucas. I don't know who attended that national championship game against Alabama. As you know, that's Deshaun Watson's exclamation point moment on his, decorated and golden college career to not only win the national title, but to do it in that fashion, dramatic fashion, against that defense that Alabama had there. And oh, by the way, one guy in attendance at Raymond James Stadium that night, Texans general manager Rick Smith, who sat, 10, 15 rows behind the Clemson bench, and from pregame until the confetti started falling, was dialed in on every single thing that Deshaun Watson was doing through that night, and has told people in Houston that there was such a level of magnetic calm and confidence to the kid that every question he had about his interception total, about his ability to operate from under center, about his build, it just evaporated when he saw him up close and personal and saw the way he affected those around him. And oh, by the way, then when they host him on a visit in Houston later during the pre-draft process, and he starts having the same sort of magnetic effect on every stranger that he meets, they say, this is the it factor. There's nothing else to sort of focus on the flaws side of this guy's checklist. This is the it factor. This is what you search for when you're looking for a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I'm reminded of an afternoon in January in Mobile, Alabama, when the Bears coaching staff, as you remember, was down there. And we spoke to Ryan on the field there at Lad Peoples Stadium. And we talked about the quarterback search. And he said something to the effect of, you look for that quarterback that lifted their college program.
Like Drew Brees did at Purdue.
Well, you and I turned to each other right away and like it's Watson. He's talking about Watson. Watson meets that criteria. And then in that Saturday press conference after the draft, which we mentioned earlier, I asked Ryan, how does Mitch meet that criteria you set of elevating the program. And he said that Mitch elevated North Carolina to a level that satisfied Ryan. And I'm thinking 7-5, Sun Bowl,
8-5,
Sun Bowl
to a Christian McCaffrey-less Stanford team.
Yeah, I mean, so to me, either you go back to that comment at Mobile, and Ryan was just saying that as a move of deception. However, there's no reason that you shouldn't adopt that approach, that criteria, right? That criteria makes all the sense in the world. And so, again, Ryan was kind of seeing what he wanted to see. Yeah. I mean, Mitch Trubisky did not earn a starting job for North Carolina before his final season there. He was a backup to Marquise Williams.
Yeah.
That was a red flag to a number of evaluators. That's not revisionist history. That was a red flag. Now, I even went back and read one of the stories I wrote about Mitch before he was drafted, and it addressed that. And Larry Fedora, the North Carolina coach at the time, just said that Marquise was sort of a heartbeat guy on the team, and they rode with him. Okay, but you got to account for that. Deshaun was that heartbeat guy and still is for the Texans. I think there are two points that I think are worth making as you talk about the Texans and their selection of Deshaun. Number one, Rick Smith is no longer their GM, and Bill O'Brien's no longer their coach. Now, Rick Smith is not their GM. It was I believe, personal reasons why he left the job.
Yes, his wife passed away from, I believe it was cancer.
Yes.
I'd have to look that up.
Yes, and so to draft that quarterback does not necessarily guarantee this organizational stability for an indefinite period, 20 years, something like that.
John Dorsey in Kansas City, right?
It's exactly the point. Right? That there still is change, and there still is friction in these organizations, because when you draft that guy and you get that guy, then your expectations are completely reset. And that's a different animal in the NFL when you talk about expectations, as the Bears are learning right now. The other part of this, the other unknown, you mentioned the unknown, is we don't know who the Bears had at that national championship game. The other unknown, as you'll recall from our reporting last year for the story, is that it's never come out where the Texans had Watson on their board.
Correct. Right. So they had third selection on this, right?
Yeah. Now, did they fall backwards into this tremendous player? Maybe, but they liked him for the right reasons. And I think that's the most important thing. They liked him for the right reasons.
Also keep in mind that they jumped up 13 slots, right? And so it wasn't one of these things like, consolation prize Deshaun. It was like, okay, let's go.
Yeah,
let's go get our guy and let's trade up and do it. Look, for those who think that the Bears are lost here because they're not going to be drafting high enough to get a quarterback, understand that the Texans and the Chiefs traded up from the 20s to get Watson and Mahomes, that they were playoff teams that came up and got their guy and solidified themselves at that position for a long time to come.
Maybe George is hearing that argument right now from the GM's office.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible that if you've got to plead your case, that you're saying that, look, we can redo this. We can still take another swing at this. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Dan, because of your experience covering the Vikings, was about Rick Spielman, the general manager there, surviving the Christian Ponder era. Because I don't think you can look around the league and find a ton of examples of general managers who get another swing at it.
Right.
Not only do you not get another swing at drafting that quarterback, but once you have one shot at the job, you're not rehired into the role like many NFL coaches are.
Right. GMs are sort of a one and done proposition.
And they know this too. Ryan has talked about this. And so there's a lot that's gone on in Minnesota to create that longevity. Part of it is defensively, but Rick has been a survivor there, and they continue to do okay. They're not in a great position right now, and who knows where that organization is headed. But I think that's an interesting contrast to maybe what the Bears are looking at.
It's a good question, because Rick's been allowed to take multiple swings, right? Like he was able to draft Teddy Bridgewater when Teddy Bridgewater got injured and had to go elsewhere. Then they opened up their vaults and paid Kirk Cousins the money that they've paid him. So they've taken some.
They had Sam Bradford as a placeholder who was functional in that.
Right, which was a trade that became necessary after Bridgewater got hurt.
Right,
and so there have been these huge swings at that position, and they haven't led to high-level success. They went to the NFC Championship game with Case Keenum as their sort of killing guy a few years ago when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. And so I don't know. I don't know how you survived that. I was gone from Minnesota by the time Ponder's career flamed out. Obviously they went to the playoffs his second season with Adrian Peterson winning the MVP award, and it was clear that there were some positive things there. But then the next season, it all came apart, and they were shuffling, moving deck chairs around the Titanic and couldn't get it right. I don't know. I don't know what they've done there to justify the success. I will just say that Rick has had teams enter the postseason on a more regular basis than the Chicago Bears have. Look, they're in danger of missing the postseason for the 12th time in 14 seasons. That is absolutely inexcusable in this modern era of football, where the door is built as a revolving door for teams to get in, come out, get in, get out. You know, that's the parity in the NFL that's supposed to be there. So you have this revolving door in the playoffs every year. The Bears just never get inside of it. and here we are again. I'll share you an anecdote that I'm sure you'll appreciate, that I heard from multiple people over the last couple of weeks about draft morning at House Hall in 2017, and about how Vic Fangio was going around the building into different offices of the coaching staff and saying, I think Ryan's drafting a quarterback, and getting surprised from all of them saying, ooh, nah, you're crazy, Vic. I don't know what you're thinking. And him saying, I don't know. He's acting really funny this morning. Like there's just something there. He's going to draft a quarterback. You've got a coaching staff that, as we mentioned, includes John Fox, Dave Ragone, and Dowell Loggins. John Fox, as I said, may have been partial to Jamal Adams and bolstering his defense at that point, but certainly loved Watson as a quarterback. Dave Ragone had a first-class ticket for the Deshaun Watson bandwagon, right? Like he was born in that. Dowell Loggins, I'm told, was obsessed with Christian McCaffrey and had spent months peppering people on the coaching staff and even in the front office with YouTube videos of McCaffrey highlights. And so when you talk about a disconnect on the coaching staff, all those guys, I'm sure, would tell you, as any NFL coach would tell you, that look, the general manager's in place to be the guy to pick his guy, right? That's why they entrust you with that power, and nobody expects their voice from the lower rungs of the coaching staff to be heard in such an emphatic way that they get the final say on who the number 2 or 3 pick in the draft is going to be. But it's just another sort of interesting morning of detail that tells you, boy, this was really a kind of out of the blue decision for some people in that building. And again, it comes back to the secrecy, the disconnect, and the passionate coveting of Mitch Trubisky that led them down this path. And this path right now is staring at one of those big yellow diamond road signs that say dead end. Those are yellow diamonds, right? I haven't taken my driver's test in a while.
Yeah, I think so. I've got to take one in Indiana pretty soon to get my license. So I better read up. Yeah, you're right. And those interactions, those types of interactions behind the scenes are so important, and yet they're often not public, right? I mean, these are the interactions that shape a franchise, that shape the relationships and the dynamics. And sometimes all that surfaces to the level at which the public can see is the end result, a firing or a playoff victory or a contract extension. But all of those interactions go on, and it's entirely worth noting that even after that pick, John Fox was a good soldier. Dowell Loggins was a good soldier. They tried to win games. They tried to save their job. They tried to get Mitch in the best position to play winning football. And
to be clear, John Fox did put Mitch Trubisky back in at the end of a preseason game and almost got him killed.
That's another one. That's another one. Once the game started counting, right? Once the game started counting on his record. Before that, who was it? It was Connor Shaw concussed at the end of the Browns preseason game, and Mitch go back in there after he played the first half. Oh man,
right.
I don't miss those late August preseason games. I'll tell you.
There were none of them. There were none this year. You didn't have to miss anything.
I'm happy for you.
I haven't missed anything either. Well, this has been like most of our conversations, a lot longer than I originally planned, but very thorough, very comprehensive, and very invigorating. Don't you agree?
It's great to talk Bears with you. I miss it very much. So I appreciate you having me on here to sort of relive some of the story that we've uncovered here. And I think, if I can say so, I think we have a good handle on what happened here and what went wrong. And so let's see what George McCaskey does. Let's see if he keeps Ted Phillips in place. Let's see if he just decides, oh, Ted's not part of this. When I think you can look organizationally all the way up. And if you want to absolve anyone, if you want to exclude anyone from this postmortem and the accountability, do so at your own risk, right? Because then you could be back here in 5 years.
Well, I think you and I agree that George McCaskey is well-intentioned and has a competitive side to him that is very important for the organization. He just needs a little bit of help in trying to put an infrastructure in place that helps you get closer to having people that can make you championship worthy.
Yeah, but I would also say when you have gone through experiences that George now has since becoming chairman, help yourself. Don't put your head in the sand from the experiences. You better learn from the experiences, or else you're going to repeat the negative ones. And if we're back here in 5 years looking at the next quarterback bust, then shame on George, right? He's got to get this right, and there's urgency in his world to do it. So, like so many Bears seasons past, right? You kind of finish up the final 3 weeks, and the main attraction is that final week 18. Unfortunately, it's just how it goes at Hallis Hall too often.
I've had some folks call me this week and say, great story. It's so sad. It's so sad. And I said, listen, I would love for one of these years to be covering achievement, right? To be covering success, to be telling people the ins and outs of how the Bears built sustained success. We had a taste of that in 2008.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's not even that long ago. It's not even that long ago, and that's why I have a
2018 isn't that long ago, you mean?
Yeah.
No, yeah.
No,
it was such a quick one-off, right? Like it never sustained itself.
And that's where I think because the body of work for Ryan Pace is 3 years bigger than Matt Nagy's, I think the questions are more pronounced around Matt. But maybe that's a conversation for another time. But for me, I mean, if George got up there and said, we're keeping Matt, he's only 2 years removed from winning Coach of the Year, and he didn't pick Trubisky, we want to give him another shot, and we're going to make changes to the football ops department, wouldn't surprise me. Surprise me. And so we'll see how connected their fates are.
Yeah, we will see. January 4th is just around the corner. As always, buddy, I enjoyed talking to you. I know you are a dedicated and devoted subscriber to this YouTube channel and want to give everybody that endorsement. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. It doesn't get any better than this, right?
Hey, do you know how proud of me my son will be when he knows that I was on your YouTube show?
And listen, like, you can be a YouTube star too. All you need is that headset, an office, some good lighting. I mean, look at this. Look how easy this is.
I need some of those APSE awards. How do you get one of those?
This is 2020. Like, this is what we do. You just sit in your home office and you chat. I mean, this is the new world, Rich.
Hey, believe me, I've been sitting in my home office for 8 months. So, although it's the guest room, like I said, offline, that my wife commandeered the office. So here I am. There's a closet, and not as nice as your bookshelf there, but I see a couple things that I am interested in, including the Bears 100, which I know is out with its second edition. It's a great little book back there. So
how about this thing that you never read yet?
That's downstairs in a box somewhere. I'll find that.
Find that on Amazon, everyone. Yeah, Blue Streak by Dan Wiederer.
It's a good time of year for that.
And enjoy that. Yeah, exactly.
Great talking to you, pal.
Always enjoy it.
Have a good one.